Before you scroll, stop. This moment matters more than you think. You didn't arrive here by accident. There was an expectation placed on your life that you were never told about directly. It wasn't spoken out loud. It wasn't written anywhere. But it existed, clearly, confidently. They expected you to fail, not because you were incapable, but because the conditions surrounding you made failure seem inevitable. The pressure, the lack of support, the timing that never favored you. From the outside, it looked certain. People assumed you would slow down, that you would compromise, that eventually you would fold quietly and adjust your expectations downward. That assumption shaped how they treated you. Opportunities were withheld. Support was conditional. Confidence in you was measured and restrained. Not maliciously, practically. They calculated outcomes based on patterns they had seen before, and by those patterns, you should have failed. But something disrupted that calculation. Time passed, pressure increased, and the expected collapse never arrived. You didn't announce resilience. You didn't demand recognition. You didn't make noise about survival. You simply continued. Not dramatically, not visibly, consistently. And consistency is what exposed the flaw in their assumption, because failure does not hide. If it's coming, signs appear early: instability, erratic decisions, desperation. None of that showed up. Instead, something else did. You became quieter, more precise, less reactive. That shift unsettled people more than failure ever would have, because failure confirms expectations. Stability under strain invalidates them. This is why attention around you changed subtly. Not praise, reassessment. People began watching instead of assuming, listening instead of predicting. They didn't celebrate you, they recalculated. And recalculation is uncomfortable, because it forces people to confront mistaken certainty. You were supposed to break. You didn't. That outcome challenged narratives that had already been written about you. Narratives that justified withholding trust, withholding support, withholding opportunity. Those narratives are collapsing now, quietly. Before we go any further, do this. Write 777 in the comments if you know that people around you quietly assumed you wouldn't make it, and you're still standing without explanation. That number signals recognition, and if this message feels precise, subscribe and turn on notifications. These files connect. Missing one weakens the picture. Now listen carefully, because the fact that failure never happened wasn't chance. It reveals something specific about how you operate under expectation. And understanding that explains why the next phase of your life will surprise the same people who doubted you most. Expectations are powerful, precisely because they are rarely spoken. They do not need to be announced to influence outcomes. They operate quietly, shaping behavior, access, and opportunity, without ever taking responsibility for the results. The expectation placed on you was not personal, it was statistical. People looked at the conditions surrounding you and made a calculation. Limited support, uneven timing, pressure without relief. Based on patterns they had seen before, they reached a conclusion. Failure was likely. That conclusion did not come from malice. It came from precedent. Most people who face prolonged pressure without reinforcement eventually compromise. They adjust goals downward. They lose clarity. They become reactive. They seek shortcuts. The expectation that you would fail was built on that pattern. What those observing you did not account for was how you respond to being underestimated. Underestimation affects people in two primary ways. For some, it becomes confirmation of doubt. They internalize it, consciously or unconsciously. For others, it removes distraction. You belong to the second category. When expectation drops, scrutiny decreases. When scrutiny decreases, freedom increases. You were given space precisely because no one expected much from you. That space became an advantage. You were not performing for approval. You were not managing perception. You were not chasing validation. You were operating quietly. That quiet operation is difficult to measure from the outside. It produces no immediate spectacle, no visible acceleration, no obvious milestones, but it produces consistency. Consistency is the one variable expectations fail to predict, because consistency does not announce itself, it accumulates. Those who expected you to fail were watching for collapse. They were looking for signs of instability. They waited for emotional reactions, for rushed decisions, for public frustration. None appeared. That absence created cognitive tension, because when an expected outcome does not materialize, the observer must either revise the assumption or double down on it. Most people double down first. They assume failure is delayed. They interpret quietness as stagnation. They mistake restraint for indecision. This is why the expectation did not disappear immediately. It lingered. But with each passing phase, something became undeniable. You were still intact, still moving, still measured, still unreactive. That persistence without collapse is disruptive. It undermines certainty. Expectations survive on confidence. Once confidence weakens, expectations erode. And erosion does not require confrontation. It happens through time. Time is the most efficient force against false assumptions. You did not need to prove anyone wrong. You did not need to argue against doubt. You allowed time to expose miscalculation. This is where many people misunderstand power. They think power is demonstrated through opposition. It isn't. Power is demonstrated through non-participation in incorrect narratives. You did not play the role assigned to you, not by resisting it, by ignoring it. That refusal destabilized the expectation, because expectations require cooperation. They require you to behave in predictable ways, to react on cue, to struggle visibly, to signal decline. You provided none of that. Instead, you continued operating according to internal standards. Those standards did not change to accommodate pressure. They remained consistent. Consistency is invisible in the short term, but devastating to incorrect assumptions over time. This is why the expectation of failure collapsed without an event. There was no moment where people admitted they were wrong. No apology, no acknowledgement, just quiet recalibration. They stopped waiting for collapse. They stopped predicting decline. They stopped assuming an ending that never arrived. That shift did not happen because you succeeded loudly. It happened because you did not fail visibly. Visible failure reassures observers. Invisible endurance unsettles them. This is also why the people who doubted you now feel uncertain around you. They cannot reconcile the version of you they predicted with the version that persists. That mismatch creates discomfort because it suggests their judgment was flawed, and flawed judgment threatens identity. Rather than confront that directly, most people choose distance. They disengage. They reduce commentary. They withhold prediction. This withdrawal is not defeat. It is correction without confession. They update internal models without announcing it. That is how expectations die. Quietly, without drama, without closure. You may have noticed this as a change in tone, less assumption, less certainty, less casual dismissal. That change did not require your participation. It occurred because time invalidated a flawed forecast. This is the most stable form of vindication. It does not provoke backlash. It does not invite counterattack. It simply alters reality until the old narrative no longer fits. This is why you are now in a different position than before. Not elevated, reclassified. The expectation of failure no longer applies. And when an expectation is removed, behavior around you changes. Access changes. Opportunity changes. Treatment changes. Not immediately, gradually, because people must adjust without admitting error. That adjustment is already happening, and it sets the stage for the next phase. Because once expectations collapse, something else begins. Observation. Not to test you, to reassess you. That reassessment carries implications, And understanding those implications explains why the attention around you feels different now. That is what we move into next. When an expectation collapses, it does not simply disappear. It leaves a vacuum, and vacuums are uncomfortable for those who relied on certainty to orient themselves. The expectation that you would fail functioned as a reference point. It allowed others to predict outcomes, justify behavior, and maintain internal balance. Once that reference point dissolved, uncertainty entered. Not about you, about their judgment. This is where the real shift begins, because people are not disturbed by others exceeding expectations. They are disturbed when their ability to predict reality is exposed as unreliable. For a long time, assumptions about your failure allowed others to behave comfortably. They could delay support, withhold commitment, remain non-committal. All of that was justified internally by the belief that investing in you carried risk. Once failure failed to arrive, that justification eroded. But people do not abandon justifications easily. They look for alternative explanations. They assume progress is temporary. They attribute endurance to luck. They wait for the real collapse. This is why the shift around you did not happen overnight. Assumptions resist revision. They linger. But as time passed, something became impossible to ignore. Your behavior did not change under prolonged strain. There was no regression, no visible instability, no emotional unraveling. Instead, there was continuity. And continuity under pressure is destabilizing to assumptions. Because assumptions rely on trend breaks. They expect deviation. You provided none. This is where authority quietly transfers, not to you, from the assumption. Assumptions only hold power as long as they explain reality. When they stop explaining reality, they lose authority. And when authority is lost, behavior changes. You may have noticed subtle shifts. People stopped offering unsolicited advice. They stopped explaining outcomes to you. They stopped framing interactions around contingency. This is not admiration, it is reassessment. Reassessment is quieter than praise. It involves observation rather than engagement. People begin watching more closely, not because they expect failure, because they no longer know what to expect. That uncertainty creates caution. Caution changes tone. Conversations become measured. Commitments become deliberate. Interactions lose casual dismissal. This is not warmth. It is respect emerging without acknowledgement. Respect that arrives when someone's capacity is no longer in question. This is also why some people became distant. Distance is a common response to invalidated assumptions. When someone realizes they misjudged you, they face a choice. Revise perception openly, or reduce proximity to avoid confronting error. Most choose the second. Distance protects ego. It allows people to update internal narratives without admitting fault. This is why the shift around you may feel anticlimactic. No apologies, no recognition, just changed behavior, changed access, changed responsiveness, changed tone. That is how authority shifts in real systems, not through announcement, through adjustment. You may also have noticed a new kind of attention, not supportive, evaluative. People are not trying to help you now. They are trying to understand you. Understanding replaces assumption. This is significant. Assumption closes possibility. Understanding opens it. Once assumptions lose authority, new categories must be formed. You no longer fit the category likely to fail, but you also have not yet been placed in a new one. So you exist in a space of uncertainty. Uncertainty attracts observation. This is why attention feels different. Not approving, not dismissive, neutral. Neutral attention is powerful. It means outcomes are no longer pre-written. This is also why some opportunities may feel tentative, offered carefully, without commitment. This is not lack of trust, it is recalibration. People are testing new assumptions. They are gathering data again. But this time, the data is not about whether you will fail. It is about how you operate without failing. That is a very different question, and it carries different implications. Failure-based assumptions focus on limits. Success-based reassessment focuses on capacity. Capacity is harder to measure. It requires observation over time, which is why this phase feels slower, not stagnant, measured. This is also why your own internal experience may have shifted. You may feel less urgency to prove anything, less need to justify choices, less interest in convincing others. That is not apathy. It is alignment with the new reality. You no longer need to fight an assumption. It has already lost authority. Engaging it now would resurrect it. Silence allows it to dissolve fully. This is an important point. Once an assumption collapses, do not engage it again. Engagement gives it relevance. Relevance restores power. You avoided failure without confronting expectation. Continue avoiding confrontation. Let time complete the correction. This is why restraint remains critical. Not because you are hiding, because you are allowing reclassification to finish. Reclassification takes time. It involves multiple observers, each updating internal models independently. That process cannot be rushed, and it does not benefit from explanation. Your role in this phase is simple. Remain consistent. Consistency completes the correction. Anything dramatic would introduce noise. Noise invites new assumptions. You do not need new assumptions. You need settled understanding. That is what is forming now, quietly. This phase is not about advancement. It is about stabilization of perception. Once perception stabilizes, action becomes easier. But that comes next, because once assumptions lose authority, a different force begins to operate. Expectation is replaced by anticipation. People stop predicting your failure. They begin anticipating your movement. And anticipation changes everything. That transition is what the next part reveals. There is a clear moment when expectation stops functioning and something else takes its place. That moment does not arrive with noise. It arrives with attention. When people expected you to fail, they did not watch closely. They assumed trajectory. They filled gaps with prediction. Now that failure never happened, prediction no longer works. So attention replaces it. This is a critical transition. Expectation is passive. Anticipation is active. Expectation waits for confirmation of belief. Anticipation prepares for movement. You may have noticed this shift without being able to name it. People check in differently now. Questions are phrased more carefully. Conversations linger a little longer. Not because they suddenly care more, because uncertainty demands observation. They are no longer watching for collapse. They are watching for direction. This is where many people sabotage themselves. They mistake anticipation for approval. They rush to perform. They accelerate to meet imagined expectations. That is not what this phase requires. Anticipation does not need spectacle. It needs consistency. The attention around you now is fragile, not weak, unsettled. Observers are trying to understand what kind of system you are. Do you spike and fade? Do you plateau? Do you escalate recklessly? Or do you move with restraint? These questions are not asked out loud. They are answered through behavior. This is why your restraint matters more now than it did before. Earlier, restraint protected you from breaking. Now, restraint protects interpretation. Interpretation determines placement. You are no longer being evaluated for survival. You are being evaluated for reliability under observation. This is a different test. Not harder, more precise. Anticipation introduces a subtle pressure of its own. Not the pressure to endure, the pressure to remain coherent while seen. You may feel this as a temptation to explain yourself, to clarify intent, to justify choices, to shape narrative. Resist that impulse. Narratives are unstable during reassessment. Any explanation offered too early becomes an anchor others cling to. Let them observe. Observation produces more accurate conclusions than explanation ever will. This is also why silence remains powerful here. Not silence as withdrawal, silence as non-interference. You are allowing others to recalibrate without guidance. That autonomy matters. People trust conclusions they arrive at themselves more than those handed to them. This is how anticipation solidifies into confidence, slowly. You may also notice that opportunities now arrive with conditions, tentative invitations, soft commitments, exploratory conversations. This is not hesitation, it is due diligence. People are testing compatibility, not competence. Competence has already been acknowledged implicitly. Compatibility determines longevity. This is why consistency is critical. Consistency signals predictability without rigidity. It shows that you can be integrated into systems without disruption. Disruption is costly. Stable contributors are preferred. You are being evaluated for that role now. This is also why your emotional range may feel narrower, not suppressed, refined. You react less dramatically because reaction would distort observation. You sense this intuitively, so you hold steady. That steadiness is being noticed, not applauded, recorded. This is also where some people will lose interest. Those who thrived on predicting your failure had emotional investment in that narrative. With that narrative gone, they disengage. Not out of malice, out of irrelevance. Their role was tied to expectation. When expectation dissolved, so did their position. Let them go. Their disengagement creates clarity. Those who remain are not waiting for collapse. They are preparing for alignment. Alignment requires trust. Trust is built slowly, through repeated, predictable behavior. This is why nothing dramatic happens immediately. Anticipation delays action until patterns stabilize. This phase can feel uncomfortable. You are visible but not affirmed, observed but not endorsed, included but not committed to. That ambiguity is intentional. It prevents premature conclusions and it tests patience. Your patience here is part of the evaluation, not patience as endurance, patience as non-interference with process. If you try to accelerate placement, you signal insecurity. If you remain steady, you signal readiness. This is also why you may feel an urge to disengage entirely, to retreat from visibility. Do not overcorrect. Withdrawal introduces uncertainty. Remain present but restrained, available but not performative. This balance is subtle, but it is exactly what anticipation responds to. Anticipation is watching for who you are when nothing is demanded. Earlier, pressure demanded response. Now, anticipation watches what you choose freely. Those choices define placement, and placement determines access. This is why the next shift will not feel like reward. It will feel like inclusion, quiet inclusion into conversations, decisions, or spaces you were not part of before, not announced, not celebrated, just present. This inclusion happens when anticipation resolves into trust, trust resolves into placement, placement resolves into influence. That sequence cannot be skipped. You are in the anticipation phase now. Do not rush it. Do not decorate it. Let it complete itself. Because once anticipation resolves, the next phase is decisive, and it requires a different kind of awareness altogether. That is what the final part reveals. When anticipation finishes its work, it does not announce itself. It resolves. Resolution is quiet. It does not feel like victory. It does not feel like validation. It feels like normalization at a higher level. This is where many people misinterpret what is happening. They expect a moment of recognition, a clear signal that doubt has ended, some form of acknowledgement. That rarely comes, because once people adjust their internal model of you, they stop narrating the adjustment. They simply behave differently. This is the most important shift of all. You are no longer being watched to see if you will fail. You are no longer being watched to see how you survive. You are now being interacted with as someone whose failure is no longer part of the equation. That is a structural change, and it alters everything that follows. You may notice that decisions involving you now assume continuity. Plans extend further. Conversations reference the future casually. Your presence is factored in rather than questioned. These are not compliments. They are assumptions of durability. Durability is what people actually trust. Not talent, not potential, not intensity. Durability, the ability to remain intact across time and pressure. You demonstrated that without performance. Now it is assumed. This assumption changes access, not dramatically, incrementally. You may find yourself included in spaces where outcomes are shaped rather than discussed, not as the center, as a constant. Constancy is influence without spotlight. Earlier, you were provisional. Now, you are baseline. Baseline positions are powerful because they are not reconsidered. They are built around. This is why things feel quieter, less emotional charge, less urgency, less need to explain. You are no longer operating against expectation. You are operating within accepted reality. This is also why self-doubt may surface unexpectedly. Not because you are uncertain, because the external tension that once structured your focus has dissolved. Pressure creates clarity through contrast. Its absence requires self-regulation. You must now generate momentum internally. This is a different skill. Earlier, survival demanded response. Now, stability demands direction. Direction cannot be reactive. It must be chosen. This is where many people stumble. They confuse relief with arrival. They relax discipline too early. They dilute standards. They drift. That is not what this phase allows. Because while failure is no longer expected, inconsistency is noticed. You are not being tested harshly anymore, but deviation stands out more clearly. Not as punishment, as data. This phase expects maintenance. Maintenance of internal consistency, decision clarity, emotional restraint. Not perfection, continuity. Continuity signals reliability. Reliability sustains placement. This is also why humility becomes essential now. Not humility that diminishes you, humility that keeps you accurate. You do not need to prove resilience anymore. You have already done that. Trying to demonstrate it again would signal insecurity. Instead, allow strength to remain implicit. Implicit strength is trusted more than declared strength. This is also why silence continues to matter. Not silence as withdrawal, silence as non-explanation. You are not obligated to narrate your trajectory. Those who matter already adjusted. Those who didn't are not relevant to placement. Do not reopen closed narratives. Let settled understanding remain settled. Another subtle shift in this phase is how failure is perceived. Failure no longer defines you. Mistakes no longer threaten identity. They are treated as events, not verdicts. This is a powerful transition. It means you can experiment without destabilizing perception. But that freedom must be used carefully. Exploration without discipline introduces noise. Use experimentation deliberately. Remain anchored while exploring edges. That balance allows growth without regression. You may also notice that some people now seek your perspective indirectly, not asking for advice openly, referencing your choices, mirroring your restraint, adopting your pace. This is influence emerging naturally, not influence you must manage, influence you must respect, because influence amplifies consequence. Careless choices ripple. Careful ones stabilize systems. This is why responsibility feels heavier now. Not imposed, implied. You are no longer operating under the assumption of failure. You are operating under the assumption of continuity. Continuity means others build expectations around your presence. Breaking that continuity would have wider impact now. This is not pressure. It is trust. Trust expects consistency, not performance. Finally, this phase requires acceptance. Acceptance that the narrative about you has changed, not publicly, Functionally, you are not who you were when failure was assumed, and you cannot return to that position even if you wanted to. The environment will not respond the same way. This is irreversible. Once expectations collapse and anticipation resolves, the system updates permanently. You have crossed that threshold. Quietly, without ceremony, without announcement. They expected you to fail. You didn't. And now that expectation is gone. What replaces it is not praise. It is integration. Integration into systems that require durability. Maintain what brought you here. Remain steady. Remain accurate. Remain uninterested in proving anything. Because the most decisive outcome of all is this: failure is no longer part of your story. Not because you succeeded loudly, but because you remained intact long enough for doubt to dissolve on its own.